You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Every Blue Jays fan is going to be thinking about one play all winter long, and that's the Isiah Kiner-Falefa lead from third, in which the Toronto Blue Jays could have won the World Series. And it's been dissected every which way, and we're going to see which is truth, which is fiction, with our baseball insider, C.J. Nitkowski. C.J., let's start with the lead. A lot of people are saying the lead was too short. One former player said, nope, that's what you're taught in spring training. From the first day of spring training, that's what you do. He was doing the right thing. Your take.
So I think from a philosophical standpoint, easy for me to say, let's go to smaller words since we're talking about the short lead, short words, probably better off for this segment. I do think that when I first saw it and talking to my guys about it, we all agreed that lead looked like it was too short. Clearly, though, the philosophy of the Braves, it's not the Braves, it's the Blue Jays, buddy. The Blue Jays that's what they wanted. You know, here. I think one of the things that's been unfair is that it's been all about IKF and on him. He was doing what he was told to do, what he believed to do, going back to what they taught, right? So this wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, after all of this is kind of unfolded, where IKF had made a mistake on what he was doing with his lead. He was doing what he was told. He was doing what he believed, right? So I think from that standpoint, that you got to make sure, I think, with the blame, or as this conversation continues, where it actually is directed, and it's kind of organizational as far as the decision that was made. But my thoughts when I watched it was that lead was a little bit too short. The plan is, of course, you don't want to get doubled up, right? That's the conversation. How far can you go? You can go as far as the third baseman is off the bag. Right, that's the big one. So there's room for a secondary, which also really didn't happen. But the initial lead for me, when I first watched it, I felt like it was short. They justified it in the reasoning, and I think that's probably where the bigger question is the philosophy that they've had in this, and was that the right decision?
The Blue Jays analytics department is probably the largest division of the team, so they would know the analytics of Dalton Varsho, who was at the plate with one out, tie game, bottom of the ninth, World Series, that he is a left-handed hitter, and the odds of him lining out to the third baseman were almost nil. So that is why the short lead argument, it doesn't hold a lot with fans when they break it down that way.
Yeah, because you have a left-handed hitter up, right? I mean, that's the other part. And you also have to take into account the pitcher that you're facing, the repertoire. It's a heavy ground ball pitcher. We know that. And so maybe does that change your philosophy a little bit? Do you start sitting there and calculating these odds and really what you should be doing? If there's a right-handed hitter up, yeah, you got to be careful there. It makes a little bit more sense. If you have a right-handed pull hitter that is up, yes, that makes a lot of sense. Dalton Varsho is neither one of those things, right? And so as a left-handed hitter who has a lot of pull-side power, and then as you mentioned, you look at the data and say, how many times has he actually lined out to third? And then how far off the bag was it, right? We might look at data, and this is where we have to be careful, is what we have access to, and say, okay, you know what, he lined out to third just once, last couple of years, whatever it was, against a right-handed pitcher. Well, where? Where was that third baseman playing at the time? He might have been 15, 20 feet off the bag, right? So it's really the location about even where that line drive was. What I found is interesting about that, though, was how close Max Muncy was keeping him at third, right? And so that was probably more based on the runner and not the hitter. They did not want him to get a very big lead, because the other issue that you have to be careful of, especially when you're dealing with a guy that's got a split, is a pitch in the dirt and a wild pitch. So you just don't want him getting a very good secondary lead. So they made that decision to play Varsho there, I think more based on the runner and not necessarily the hitter. But going back to what you're saying, absolutely. When you look at that and say, listen, the odds of this happening are so slim, but the odds of him putting the ball in play on the ground with the infield in and there being a play at the plate are significantly higher. Which odds do we really want to be playing? Which ones do we want to try to beat? You can't cover everything. And I think in that, when you look at that in retrospect, the batted ball data for Dalton Varsho, the pitcher at the plate, you've got to be willing to take that chance to get a little bit of a bigger lead.
Another argument people have made, and it makes no sense. They said the Blue Jays were playing not to lose. It was a tie game. It was the bottom. They couldn't lose.
Yeah.
They should have been aggressive. The fact that they had this data and they were gun shy because of what happened to Addison Barger in Game 6 on second base.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And it's the Addison Barger part that it's the night before that is looming. We can't make the mistake that we made the previous night. We cannot run into an out we should not be running into. We can't be giving an out up on the bases that we should not be giving. It happened last night. It cost us an opportunity to win that World Series. The other part of it, too, when it comes to how close you're playing, and I listened to Max Muncy talk about this since then, was would there be a potential back pick? Right, that's the other part. So you have, yes, you can't line out, but what about picking a guy off who is being aggressive? What about a guy who's taking a bigger secondary lead, looking for that splitter or curveball that's in the dirt that kicks away from the catcher, and if it gets far enough away, can I score? You can't do that without an aggressive secondary lead, and it's some anticipation in there. When you're doing that, you are now susceptible to being backpicked by the catcher. A.J. Pierzynski, who's done it for a long time, calls games for Fox and said that you would never backpick in that situation. The risk versus reward is too high to throw the ball away. Now you've lost the World Series. And then you're on every highlight the rest of the way if you throw the ball into left field, and that's how you lost. Max Muncy kind of disputed that and said that's not necessarily true for us because we talk about it all the time, and it's not a big sign. He doesn't have to step out in front of the plate and give a bunch of signs. I've worked with Will Smith now long enough to know that it's going to be eye contact for us. And there's some eye contact to let us know, like, heads up, I might. And he said he got that eye contact. So that part of the conversation, while I would agree with AJ initially and say, yeah, you're not doing that. You're not taking that chance, are you? But it's almost like using that same phrase. If you're playing not to lose, you might lose. And if you saw an opportunity to backpick and you think you can get it out and get you out of that jam, which was a huge one, then maybe you would take it, right? And these are big leaguers that have a lot of confidence in what they do, and they'll take some what we might feel like are unnecessary risks. So that's kind of the other counter to that is like, you're not going to get backpicked, man. Take a bigger lead. Well, Max Muncy said, and who knows, you never know after the fact. It could be messing with guys, but I don't think so. Said, no, we would have if we saw the opportunity.
We're not talking about any of this if Dalton Varsho just put the ball into the outfield, but that's neither here nor there. The final part of the play that everyone's breaking down is the IKF slide into home, which baffles and boggles my mind because it's a forced play. Why on earth would you do a feet-first slide, which is the slowest way to get to a base? He should have sprinted straight through home.
Yep, and he's a decent runner. He's a good enough runner where you're absolutely right. Again, did Carlos Feblis get in his ear and tell him that, right? These situations, they're big. And they're big even for big leaguers who have done it for a long time. It's Game 7. It's loud. It's an opportunity to win a World Series. And not to put it on Carlos, but it's one of those things. These are the jobs of the base coaches. And you sometimes wonder, I think probably for the average fan, like, what's that guy doing down there at first base? Does he really have anything to offer? Is there really a lot to coach? There are all these little kind of check boxes you got to check off for guys in big spots, right? If you're over at first base and you might tell a guy, hey, heads up for a line drive here. Hey, the right fielder's playing deep. The opportunity to take the bag, go first and third is going to be there. This guy's a 1-5 to the plate. You can steal off of him. These are all the little conversations that are going on over at first. Well, third base, very similar. And in that spot, should he have been reminded, ground ball, do not slide, run through the bag, or run through the plate? And did they even talk about that? Was that something they kind of covered in spring training, right? These are the things that hardly ever come up during the regular season that end up looming large in a postseason and in a World Series. And you've seen it at first base. It drives us crazy when you get a guy who hits a ground ball in the infield and dives headfirst into first base. And like, why? Why would you do that? You're not going to get there any quicker. There's also a higher percentage of getting hurt in that spot and hurting a shoulder. Now, there are some spots where you might see a really high throw that's kind of up the line a little bit. That's probably the one time where it's okay. You're trying to avoid a tag. And so I asked a guy about that one time. I said, come on, why do you guys do this? Why do guys do this all the time? I was a position player, and he said, you're running, and you just feel like you're going to get there quicker if you dive or you slide, even though you know what the data is, but there is something about seeing the moment, seeing the bag, and you want to go out there and you want to grab it, or you feel like you can slide to it quicker because that's what you usually do. I don't know what Carlos Feblis said in that moment, but as we saw it play, and again, it's easy for all of us to say it now after the fact, but it would have been probably a good time to remind him, ball on the ground, you're gone, run through the plate, you're going to get there quicker.
Do they have an analytics department breaking down head first versus feet first and how much quicker head first is, or is it even quicker?
Someone's definitely done it. I've never seen anything on it, right? Imagine you're in a data analytics department for a team, and we see this in anywhere in the world, right? You always want to be justifying your job, right? So no stone is unturned. You're going to be thinking about ideas all the time, and there's probably a lot of ideas that have been poo-pooed, and that doesn't matter because at the end of the day, we're still watching a baseball game, and a lot of it looks really similar. You're always trying to exploit maybe the little things here and there, head first, through the bag, feet first, what is actually quicker. You'll see some of these guys like Shohei after getting hurt. You want him feet first into second base when he's stealing bases all the time. Ronald Acuna Jr. here in Atlanta after he hurt his knee, he was a big-time base stealer, we know it, goes to feet first because he had some knee injuries, right? So there's also the protection part of it as well. But when it comes to what is fastest, I mean, through the bag is always going to be the quickest. Head first versus feet first is an interesting one. I would guess on the surface. I say I'm going to guess, and I feel like now I'm second guessing. I went from guessing to second guessing before I could even come up with an answer. I feel like feet first would be quicker. But again, there's something about these guys feeling like falling forward, I'm going to dive, I'm going to get there quicker and touch that base.
All I know is if Dalton Varsho bloops one into the outfield, no one even remembers IKF's lead.
Nope.
And the fact that that poor guy spends the entire offseason, and he would love to buy a billboard in Toronto and say, I was just doing what the coaches told me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's important that the information gets out there, right? And it's important that I think that you're doing this, that everybody is continuing to kind of cover it a little bit, take some heat off of IKF. He took quite a bit of it early on after the fact, even from those within the game. Whit Merrifield, I thought, did a nice job of getting out there in social media and kind of explaining it a little bit. Others have as well, which is good. It's nice to have that kind of access. It's nice to have guys that care to be able to put it out there. But I do think, as we talked about, it's probably a bigger picture, maybe an organizational philosophy based on everything that was going on in that moment. Did that really make the most sense? And I think we've concluded that it did not.
CJ, thanks for this, buddy.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.